Thanks for joining us for another edition of Behind the Editor's Curtain with Don Corrigan. Each edition focuses on points of interest relating to the environment and the community. This week, Don's special guest is Sister Renita Brummer. She's from the Franciscan Sisters of Our Lady of Perpetual Help, located in Kirkwood. And now, here's Don.
Well, hi, Sister. Thanks for your time this morning, and congratulations on your recent trip.
Thank you. It was quite a privilege to be part of such a historic event.
So before we really get into the Pope, and what are the Franciscans all about, and why are they really have a connection? You got a Pope named Francis and the Franciscans. Is there a natural connection?
Well, absolutely. You know, St. Francis lived in the 1200s, but he has had such an influence worldwide, and there are many groups of Franciscan sisters, and our group is located right here in Kirkwood. And we were quite surprised and pleased when Cardinal Bergoglio was elected Pope and that he chose the name Francis. So I think it brought together the best of his acute Jesuit training in mind and his real passion and love for care of the poor and respect for human dignity. So from the very beginning, we Franciscan sisters have felt this connection with Pope Francis because he is connected to that original spirit of Francis from the 1200s. And of course, as a Franciscan community, we are the Franciscan Sisters of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. In recent years, we have become very aware that one of the poorest in our world today is our earth. Mm-hmm. And that lack of care for our earth and all that is happening with global warming and climate is contributing to the poverty of people.
Well, your community doesn't just write or talk about these issues like stewardship of the earth. You kind of talk the talk, but you also walk the walk, don't you?
Well, I'm hoping that's what's happening. That's how we're trying to make a difference, not just speaking about it, but actually committing to doing things. And, you know, the first challenge of that, Mr. Corrigan, was to challenge ourselves in our own lifestyle. How do we walk the earth? How do we conserve water? Do we use a lot of plastics? Are we aware of what's in our food? Do we have an appreciation where our food comes from?
So you reduce your carbon footprint on a daily basis by some of the actions that you take?
Absolutely. And we try and share this with other people as well. For example, we have 40 acres just south of St. Louis in DeSoto, and we've started a sustainable farm there and garden through the leadership of Maurice, who works with us in our Franciscans for Earth Connection. I think a lot of people know us in Kirkwood by a wonderful film series that we have that highlights some of the actual environmental earth issues that challenge us today and look at the complexity of some of these issues. So he helps us with that farm down in DeSoto, and we did a simple thing like had a potato dig for grandparents, parents, and little children to come, and they were amazed that those potatoes grow under the ground, and to see them with their little shovels unearthing those potatoes and then holding one up and saying, "Look what I have," and so thrilled to go home and cook those potatoes. That's what it's about.
So do you have tours? I mean, if people want to learn more about this approach, or do you have tours? Or are there times that the public can visit?
Absolutely. Yes, we're located right here at 335 South Kirkwood Road, and they can stop here and pick up a calendar of events when we're showing these films, when we have other events scheduled, or if they would like some information or to set an opportunity to meet with Maurice or any of our sisters, we'd be happy to do that. And in fact, a simple thing we're doing this Sunday is actually when we celebrate St. Francis of Assisi. So we're going to have a blessing of animals that anybody can come bring their little pets. We do ask that they're in a cage or on a leash, just so that everybody can be happy and play well together. So we're going to have a special little blessing of animals. So we do welcome people to come and learn more about what we're about and how they can be a part of this also.
So well, let's talk about your trip to Washington, I believe it was, to see Pope Francis. What inspired that, and what were the details that made that possible?
Well, Pope Francis visited Washington, D.C., and then he went to New York and then to Philadelphia. And in Washington, D.C., of course, he met with President Obama. One of our sisters who lives and is very active in the D.C. area was invited to that meeting. I had the opportunity and received a ticket to go to Washington, D.C. to be at the large Mass of canonization at the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception, and that was for the canonization of a friar who lived in the 1700s, Father Junipero Serra, who helped to begin all of the Franciscan missions. We wouldn't have San Francisco and Los Angeles and Santa Barbara if it wouldn't be for Father Junipero Serra. So as a Franciscan, I had the opportunity to participate in that event. And so I was in Washington, D.C. for the events, and being there with the enthusiasm of the people and to hear his address to Congress, I was not present for that, but to hear that was really quite overwhelming for me, to see the universal appeal and so many young people. I think half of Georgetown University.
So is it correct to call him a rock star, or do you think that's a little goes off the edge a little bit?
He was asked about that, and he said, I don't know what you mean by a rock star, but if it's one who serves, who can be a light for others, that's what I want to be. But it really was kind of a combination of a political figure, a rock star, and a prophet. Now, if you could roll all three of those into one, then you have Pope Francis.
Well, some folks think that he's maybe a little bit too political. His encyclical on climate change and the environment. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think Pope Francis's agenda is not political. His agenda is to bring forth the human dignity of each person so that we can all be our deepest, truest self. And what is that transcendent dignity? And when we look at that challenges then about distribution of wealth. That's the root of our immigration concern. It's about the refugee crisis, and it's about care of the earth. The Pope.
So the two are connected.
Any harm done to the environment is harm done to humanity, and our earth is a great gift to us. So how can we use the resources? How can we properly apply technology? How can we harness our spirit of enterprise so that we're taking care of this gift that we have, not only for future generations, but because we are so integrally connected with us. We are part of the network and the earth. We're not apart from and above. So he's really raising this up as a concern for all of us.
In your own mind, your own view, as you studied this, what are some of the clearest signs or evidence that climate change is happening? It's man-made and it's having a impact that we need to be concerned about.
Well, I think the air that we breathe, the foods that we eat, what's in our earth that's affecting the foods that we eat, what's in our water, and much of this is happening because of what we have done, I believe, saying that we have a right to do whatever we want to do in creation, and it's all about progress, and we are able to dominate, rather than seeing these elements really as a brother and sister, and we're in relationship. And as Chief Seattle said way years ago, our Native American brothers and sisters understood this: what we do to Earth, we do to ourselves. And we're reaping a lot of the negative side effects of what we've done to Earth. And it's difficult for us to assume that responsibility and to admit that. It's a difficult issue in our world today,
sure,
especially in our country.
Obviously, it's hard not to get into politics to address some of these issues because they really need. I mean, you can do things individually at the grassroots level, but you also need policy changes. What kind of policy changes do you think make sense when it comes to addressing climate change?
Well, we have to somehow confront the polarization that this is such a political issue, and address the wounds that have come from all sides, and accept our common responsibility for Earth. And we could look to government to do it, we could look to industry to do it, but each of us needs to make a change in our lifestyle, and look at the complexity of the issues. I don't want to be simplistic about this. How significant is our own convenience in this? We do a lot of things because they're convenient. We look at all of our prepared foods, all of everything that's pre-packaged, and the huge amount of waste. We're creating mountains of landfills, and we're dumping huge amounts of our waste into the Pacific Ocean, affecting animals. So things do need to change, and it needs to happen through our legislation.
Yeah, it strikes me that it's not just legislation and Congress that need to react. It seems like we look toward politicians, but in fact, it seems like corporate heads, when they take the lead on this, there actually is more change. I just noticed that the head of the Bank of England said we got to start worrying about this, and he's concerned about Lloyd's of London as an insurer, what's going to happen to properties that they insure when they start going underwater.
Yes, exactly. It's going to affect us eventually, and maybe when it starts affecting us economically, we'll be willing to look at this. When it affects us through the corporations and our need to succeed and have revenue. So when it affects us economically through our large companies and politically, maybe then there'll be more of a willingness to look at this.
I know in St. Louis we're in some ways insulated from some of the impact, especially when it comes to the rise in the oceans and water. But I was at a Society of Environmental Journalists conference in Miami where they took us out and showed us how the water's getting higher and the storm sewers are flooding more at high tide. And they said, don't you in the Midwest think that this doesn't affect you, because if things go the way we seem to think they're going, you could have a mass migration to St. Louis from Florida, because Florida is going to be underwater in 50 years.
Exactly. I have a friend whose parents visited Alaska 25 years ago. And recently, their married children were going to go to Alaska to the same place, and the village looked entirely different. It was practically not there anymore because of the change in the water and the North Polar Cap melting. So we tend to live kind of parochial and in our own little bubble, and yet it is all interconnected. And so what does happen anywhere will affect us eventually, absolutely.
So why do you think it is so hard to, convince the skeptics when it comes to man-made climate change? Is it just that we've unfortunately politically polarized ourselves and people need to dig in their heels because it's part of their identity? Why is it so hard to talk about this issue?
It's kind of a challenging question. In my experience, it's a very basic part of who we are, that it's difficult for us to assume responsibility, that there are things that we might be doing that are causing harm, that we ourselves personally need to change. We've just kind of been enculturated to believe that we as a people know and we are correct and that how we live is okay. So it's very difficult to shift a mentality of who we are as Americans and what's most important. We do live kind of in a time of entitlement and convenience. Convenience is a great American value. And so it really requires us to think inside of who we are and our willingness to look at the greater good, the common good, and that it basically comes down to our common home. This is our common home for all of us. And if I am doing something that is harming this common home in which we live, in which we're all connected, that I, in humility, need to be willing to change and to own that. So
do you think the Pope has the ability for a breakthrough and an enlightenment on this issue, that people who may have been skeptical before are taking a second look? Or are you concerned that, in fact, people will just dig in their heels harder and this could even, split the church to some extent?
I like to believe in the power of the Spirit through a prophetic person like Pope Francis, and also believe in, while we do have that desire and need to protect ourselves and be about convenience in our own journey, there is also the best in each of us. So I don't think it's going to divide. I think many people will look at this in a new way, and I hope the message of his encyclical, which he really addresses to all people, would say, yes, any harm done to our environment is harming each of us, and what can we do about this, and not have it be polarized and become a political issue. I know it already is. Mm-hmm. But people of goodwill who care are going to move through that and beyond that. And there is already such a sense and commitment to that on behalf of so many people. And truthfully, Mr. Corrigan, I don't know how old you are, but many of us are, I would say, cultural immigrants to this whole sense of the environment and our common home, and realize the more integral interconnection of all of us. It's going to be the next generation of children now who will help us find this and find the way through it politically and all the polarization. And that's where the hope, I believe, is.
Right. Of course, it's a very practical thing for them too, because they have the most to lose. When you look at all these prognostications of when, we're really going to be impacted by all of this.
Yes.
Well, so one last question about your trip. What did you take away from it when people ask you, what was it like going to Washington, and what do you take away from the Pope's visit to the United States?
I take a great sense of hope in the basic goodness of people, and it's not about what religion we are, what we believe, where we stand. It's about our common humanity, and that there is a goodness in us that is being called forth, that we can shine that for each other. And Pope Francis could speak to that so articulately, whether he was at the United Nations, he was at Congress, he was speaking about this little Franciscan friar who established the missions in California. So to me, it's a great hope in the goodness of people and the dignity of each person, because I saw such a range of thousands of people of various backgrounds, economic levels, ages, all there because of a person who can speak a positive message of hope and mercy. He spoke so much about we need to engage in a culture of encounter, to speak to each other, to know each other, to enter each other's lives. Because that's through that relationship is the only way that change is going to come about. And we are each the image of God. We have a transcendent dignity. So that was all highlighted for me and confirmed as I stood there in that sea of humanity under that blue sky, and just saw the hope and the mercy that not only is God speaking to us, but that's in each of us. And we have the capacity, and many people have the will to do this, and we engage others, and it shall happen.
Well, I said that was going to be my last question, but you mentioned that he kind of singled out people who are activists, not cloistered, and one of them was Dorothy Day. Does Dorothy Day fit into this paradigm of caring about people and caring about the earth? Absolutely. That was her whole purpose, and she was not looked upon kindly initially in her passion for justice and for her cause of working with the oppressed, but she certainly brings forth a whole sense of how do we work with these problems? How do we deal with this? So it was really her tireless work of working with the oppressed and for peace. When we strive for justice, we do it through peace, and many people who are poor and the oppressed call us to that. So that he singled her out as one of a person from our culture, our time, our American history, who can truly be a model, along, of course, with Abraham Lincoln,
Martin Luther King and Thomas Merton. It's interesting, he chose two great leaders who called forth the best of us who were not Catholic. So for the Pope, it's not just about being Catholic, but certainly for Martin Luther King and his dream for full rights for everyone, and Lincoln and Thomas Merton, who probably many people don't know about, but his whole sense of how do we engage dialogue? How do we engage in dialogue across differences? And that peace comes through engaging in dialogue and reflecting. You know, as a people, we're so busy with all of our technology. Sure. We don't have time to self-reflect and to allow another voice to come to us.
Well, Sister, we've enjoyed dialoguing with you today.
Yes, it's been great, Mr. Corrigan.
Yes, and we've been speaking with Sister Renita Brummer of the Franciscan Sisters of Our Lady of Perpetual Help, and we'll look forward to following the sisters and what you're up to on this whole issue of climate change and the earth in the future.
Thank you very much. We welcome everyone's participation.
Okay, thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
This is Don Corrigan with Environmental Echo. Until next time, have a good green day.